I am thrilled I get to chat with Alice Aedy in person today. We will be talking about how powerful art and storytelling are in motivating climate action. Alice is a documentary photographer, filmmaker, and activist whose work focuses on forced migration, environmental issues, and women's stories. Welcome, Alice. It is so great to be here with you today.
Thanks for having me.
So let's just jump right into the conversation. Let's start with the pandemic. Your work has really come out of creativity and art, and you were fueled by the pandemic in a really interesting way. Tell us a little bit about that.
God, yeah, so the pandemic, I guess, has forced all of us to be creative in ways we never thought we could be. I am a filmmaker, as you said. I'm so used to traveling across the world to tell climate stories. And when the pandemic hit and I was forced into isolation, I questioned how I could continue to communicate the climate and share stories of those on the front lines. And so I started a platform called Earthrise, which is communicating climate on Instagram, but still with a focus that I'm really, really passionate about on humans. This is such a necessary reframing, I think, of the climate conversation to focus on those living on the front lines for whom it's an everyday reality. I think, we're here in London. Sometimes the climate crisis can feel really intangible, distant. I think we speak about it as happening sometime in the future, far down the line. But what I've found through my travels and the stories that I've told, it's absolutely a reality right now. For so many, it's a life and death struggle. So how can we humanize the crisis, tell better stories about the crisis, which empower us to take action? I guess fundamentally don't make us feel powerless. So many of the stories make us feel like we can't make an impact. And I'm so passionate about injecting and harnessing hope and creativity into our storytelling to make us feel that we can all make a difference.
So I love this idea of humanizing, using art to humanize the story of climate change. Tell us some human stories.
Yeah, well, I think this is really at the heart of how we fail to tell stories by not telling those human stories. I never grew up feeling passionate about the climate crisis. I was terrible at recycling. I never really understood the crisis. I engaged with it, I guess, in an abstract way. I vaguely understood carbon emissions, but everything changed for me when I started to find these human stories. So whether it was drought in Somaliland or Kiribati, which is an island in the Pacific, which at its highest point is just 2 meters above sea level, meeting people for whom they're experiencing it every day was incredibly moving and really just reinforced the gravity and the urgency of the situation. And this is the power of human stories, right? We are both so passionate about storytelling, and I believe that stories can change the world. However naive, I think creativity and stories can inspire us. They can make us change our behavior and engage with these massive intangible issues. I think in a way, we need to find those key leverage points that make us engage emotionally. We need to anchor it in something that we can all understand. And for me, that is social justice. So the climate crisis is not just something happening to nature and to the environment. It is a social justice issue. It will only exacerbate everything we care about. So if you care about women, climate change is a feminist issue. It will disproportionately impact women. If you care about racial justice, the climate crisis will only disproportionately impact those who have done the least to cause it, and they live predominantly in the global south. What I found in documenting the refugee crisis is that this is an intersectional issue. So I started my career as a photographer in refugee camps, documenting forced migrants across Europe and the Middle East. What I didn't realize was that climate change is going to cause the biggest mass migration in history. So if I cared about refugee rights and I cared about all the people who I'd met who'd been forced from their homes, I had to care about climate change.
Definitely thinking about forced migration as one of the biggest issues to be concerned with right now. As we're leading into COP26,
yes,
big negotiations taking place in Glasgow in November. What are you excited about? What are you hoping to hear from world leaders thinking about what you've seen on the front lines while documenting these stories?
COP is such a huge moment. It's being hosted, of course, in the UK. I know that young people in particular are desperate for answers from our leaders. We absolutely want to escalate the ambition of what's being demanded and what comes out of those negotiations. For me, I guess, as a young person, communicating to young people, the climate curious who know that there's an issue and absolutely want to get involved and make a difference, this is the time. I couldn't say it more loudly. Don't let anyone stop you. Get involved and demand more from our leaders. You don't have to be a climate expert to talk about this issue. I think that, often we think we have to be a perfect environmentalist to have a voice on this issue. That is so far from the case. I think that has excluded so many people. We all have the right to demand more. This is such a mammoth and existential challenge, and we all have a stake in it. For so long, for literally decades, scientists have been shouting from the rooftops that there is a crisis. Now I think it's up to communicators and creatives. When I asked myself, what can I do? What is my role in this climate movement? I said, I should use my passion for storytelling and my passion for creativity. I think so many young people want to do something, and I really invite them to use the tools at their disposal. Activism means many different things to so many people, but for me, it's about celebrating that everything makes a difference, whoever you are and whatever it means. Young people have to have and make their voices heard at COP this year, particularly in the UK. I really want to encourage a momentum of people to make demands and be really ambitious in those.
I love that idea of communication being the biggest factor. Who's inspiring you right now? If we're thinking about creativity and art, moving the conversation along, and younger people now having so many tools to their disposal, right? Like no longer are there gatekeepers for releasing your work. Who are you being inspired by? Who do we need to know about that we may not know right now?
Some of them, my biggest inspirations, you've already been speaking to. One of them is Leah Thomas, an incredible activist in the US. They are young people who are harnessing the tools mainly of social media. Social media's, the whole landscape has changed recently, and we're using education and infographics to talk about the issues that we care most about. I'm super inspired by that movement. We all have to find the ways in which we can tell stories, because the stakes could not be higher. We have to tell new stories that put humans at the center, that tell a new story about nature. I think one of the main crises here that is at the root of so much is our broken relationship with nature. How do we tell new stories that make us realize that we are not separate to nature, we are part of it?
What have you learned? What's the biggest thing, the biggest lessons you've learned in the last, say, year that you want to take forward in regards to climate solutions?
Just a small question then.
Just a small question.
The biggest lesson that I've learned, not only in the past year, but over the years that I have been documenting people living on the front lines of the climate crisis, is this cruel irony that those who have done the least to cause climate change are disproportionately impacted. For me, it's at the heart of all of this, understanding how the climate crisis is a symptom of broken systems, and we have to fix those broken systems. That's what I'm passionate about. I think that creativity and storytelling, as I've said, can change the world. It can change our behaviors, but also it can paint a picture of a better world. We have to visualize the world that we're moving towards. And this is a world full of opportunity. Of course, the climate crisis is a huge challenge, but it's also an opportunity to change things. We know that this isn't the best that we can do, not politically, not economically. We can do better. And I feel passionately that we can build a fairer, greener, more just world in every way. So I will continue to fight for that and play a tiny, tiny role in an extraordinary movement.
Well, your role isn't tiny. You're creating a wonderful community, and I look forward to seeing what you do in the future with that. So thank you so much for being here with us.